Hello, welcome to today's lecture. I'm Lady TrenettWilson, your lecturer and social historian. And today we're going to meet a woman who was burning up the stages in the 1950s. She became known as the Black Marilyn Monroe because of her enormous beauty, but most of all because of her signature silver hairstyles. Now, oddly enough, at the peak of her career, she left to serve in ministry, only to return again. Now, if you love the beautiful melodic voices of some of the best singers of our time, like Jennifer Holliday, Phyllis Hyman, and even Raquel Welch, you can give the credit to Miss Joyce Bryant, their voice teacher. So let's get started. Again, welcome everyone. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we learn about this wonderful woman's life. And I always say, we are so hidden in African American history. So to find out about this woman who was born on October the 14th, 1927 in Oakland, California. And Joyce was the third of 8 children. Now, back in those days, they were having lots of babies, not only in the South, but also in the West. And her father's name was Whitfield W. Bryant. He was a chef. And her mother's name was Dorothy Constance. And she was a devoted Seventh day Adventist. We'll see this come up again later in Joyce's life because she was raised with a very, very strict mother. But at the same time, one of her uncles and grandfather, they had music in their family. And so Frank Douglas Withers, was her grandfather, was a jazz trombonist. So she also loved music. Now, she was a very, very shy girl, and you can only imagine living in this really strict environment. Sometimes what happens is, you kind of get wild. And that's kind of what happened to Miss Joyce. You see, at 14, she ran away and got married. But by the time she returned home the same evening, the marriage was annulled. So that was cut out. But she still was looking for adventure. So in 1946, she was visiting with a cousin in Los Angeles who dared her to get up on the stage and sing. Now, Joyce, was very shy, but, she needed the money. And so she decided to get up and sing. She mentioned this in a Jet interview back in 1955, how when she got up there, how nervous she was and scared. But if you won, she could win $25. And she actually needed that money to get back to Oakland. So she went on upstage and she up to the stage and she sang. Now, during the late 1940s, she had slowly started becoming known by people, and she was getting around $400 a week. She was performing at this place called the La Marinique nightclub in New York. Now, her mother was probably having a stone cold fit, her being such a religious woman and not wanting her daughter to be in this type of career. She also booked a 118 show tour of the Catskill Mountains hotel circuit. So her name was getting out. She even grew so big that she was the opening act for Josephine Baker. But it wasn't until she went through a little change. You see, at first, she wasn't dressing very provocative at all. She was torn. She was a religious girl. She loved her mom and everything, but she still had this desire to make money and sing. And she had a 4-octave voice, so she was an extremely talented woman. Well, she went to a woman, her name, and I left a link for you there to click on to check her out. She was one of the people to help design the Playboy Bunny outfit. And she helped design this dress for Joyce Bryant. You see, she told Joyce, listen, if you're going to be a big star, you gotta, sex it up a little bit. You gotta make yourself look a little bit more alluring. And Joyce, she needed the money and she was tired of just kind of staying at a certain level. So she said, okay. So here she reformed her whole entire self. Now, when she performed for Josephine Baker, this is the night that this new Joyce Bryant showed up on the scene. She had dyed her hair silver with radiator paint. And she performed in this tight silver dress that was floor length, and it became her moniker. Now, everywhere she went, they absolutely loved her, but she still dealt with a lot of racism. It was sad. She was saying that she had to perform at places that were segregated, and a lot of times that she was discriminated against. But because of her beauty and talent, doors continued to open up for her. The great Etta James said, "I don't want to be like anyone else except Joyce Bryant." She thought she was beautiful, and so she copied her style, thus the silver hair. Now, beginning in 1952, Bryant began to release a series of records. And this is so funny to me because her records were banned from the radio because they said they were too sexual in nature. And so they would ban Drunk with Love. And one of her songs was called Drunk with Love. And if you know Beyonce's song Drunk in Love, I mean, it went number one. And here in 1952, they wouldn't even play her song on the radio. The first song that she ever got played on the radio was called Running Wild. And she was shocked that she even got that one to be played. They really felt like she was too sexual. Now, in 1954, she became one of the only and first black singers to perform at the Casino Royal in Washington, D.C., where she said that she had heard so much about the discrimination that she didn't even think that they were even going to let her perform. But there she was. She was an extremely talented. So in 1953, Life did this layout of her and they made her look really provocative. And one historian, his name was Donald Bogle, he said that during that time in those type of magazine, white women were not depicted as such. And so they really sexualized all of the black women at that time. In fact, during 1953, Ebony did a cover of all these women: Lena Horne, Hilda Sims, Eartha Kitt, and Dorothy Dandridge, and they called them the most beautiful black women in the world. And Joyce Bryant, poor. By the 1950s, Joyce was making $3,500 per performance. And her name had grown throughout the whole entire industry. She was even traveling overseas to do her business. Her low cut gown, her sultry voice, the people just loved it. But deep down inside, Joyce was going through some inner turmoil. Her religion had always been on the forefront of her mind, and I'm sure her mother had always been politicking in the back for her to stop. And so she decided, you know what, I'm gonna have to stop. She had had these performances and she had gotten a little throat problem, and the doctor said, "I can keep you performing. All I have to do is spray a little cocaina on your voice cords and you'll be ready to sing again." And she decided, I can't do it anymore. One time she was even assaulted in her dressing room by a stalker. So the whole nightclub scene was getting old to her, especially with her being a Christian woman. So what she did is she started ministry. She went back to her Seventh-day Adventist faith and she lived her 200,000 a year career. One of the headlines in May of 1956 said, "The world of Joyce Bryant, former cafe singer, gives up $200,000 a year career to learn to serve God." So it was shocking that she had left that career. She traveled throughout the years through the South and really all over the country. And one thing she really saw was the discrimination. So she lent her voice to that. She also was a very close friend of Martin Luther King Jr.'s. And so she also sung at several of his events. Now, one thing that happened that kind of made her return to the music industry was when she was working for the Seventh-day Adventist. She went to them and she said, "Listen, we need to put some real teeth into this. We need to put some finances behind this. Will you finance me to help these people?" And they said no. And that really broke her heart. So she still kept her relationship with God, but she left the Seventh-day Adventist and she returned to the field of singing. Became a vocal she became a vocal coach, and she studied with Frederick Wilkerson, winning a contract, which led to her winning a contract for the New York City Opera. From there, in the 1980s, she became a vocal instructor, and I mentioned some of those wonderful women who were her students. Miss Bryant passed away at 95 years old on November the 20th, 2022, of Alzheimer's. So she just recently passed away. I hope that you enjoyed today's lecture. Joyce was such an interesting woman. And you hear of Dorothy Dandridge, you hear of Eartha Kitt, but Joyce's name, I think, is lost because she did leave the industry to serve God. And then when she came back, she didn't come back as really a performer, but more so a voice instructor. And so I respect her. She couldn't be in those environments, and she did what was healthy for herself. This only. I As you know, my lectures are for entertainment and educational purposes only. My resources were Marcus J. Moore's Joyce Bryant, The Lost Divas, Veronica Wells' Joyce Bryant, The Black Marilyn Monroe, and blackpass.com. Now, don't forget to like, share,